Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Tyler's Row by Miss Reed. Chapter 5, Making a Start. Trouble was certainly looming for Peter Hale. The two surveys confirmed that there was dry rot in the ground floor of the cottages and in one king beam, and that rising damp in the back of the property was causing considerable damage to the fabric of the outer walls. "Nevertheless," said Mr. Croft, the architect, "there's nothing to worry about. All these little matters can be put right." He leant back in his swivel armchair and surveyed Peter Hale benevolently. He was the senior partner in the firm of Croft and Cumberland, and something of a personage in Caxley. He was a man of unusual appearance, affecting from his youth rather long hair and a style of dress which blended the artist with the country gentleman. His tweed suits were pale, and with them he wore a bow tie which carefully matched them in color. His shirts were always made of white silk, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat at a jaunty angle. Someone once said that Bellamy Croft was the cleanest man in Caxley, and certainly his face shone with soap, and his hair, now white, formed a fluffy white halo round his gleaming pink scalp. A whiff of eau de cologne accompanied him, and was particularly evident when he shook out the large, vivid silk handkerchiefs he affected. Caxley's more sober citizens thought Bellamy Croft rather a popinjay, but as time passed he was looked upon as a distinguished member of the community, and the results of his work were much admired. As a young man, he had spent some years in India when the British Raj held sway. Indian princes had employed him, and he had worked on some projects instigated by Sir Edwin Lutyens himself. Caxley was impressed by this exotic background, but even more impressed with the solid work he did in their own neighborhood when he settled there. Now, nearing 70, he took on only those projects which he liked, and certainly only those within easy range of the Caxley office. The conversion of old property was a specialty of his, and Tyler's Row attracted him. Peter Hale knew he was lucky to have his service, but was a little apprehensive about the cost of the job. "I don't want Bellamy Croft to run away with the idea that I'm one of his Indian prince clients, with strong rooms stuffed with emeralds and rubies of pigeon egg size, and diamonds too heavy to lift," he said to Diana. "Do you think he has any idea of teachers' salaries?" "Of course he has," replied Diana robustly. "Anyway, ask him. If it's outrageously expensive, we'll manage without him." "Impossible," said Peter. "He knows his stuff, and will see that old Fairbrother gets on with the building properly. I don't grudge Croft's fee. It'll be an investment. But I must see that he doesn't get carried away with all kinds of schemes for improving the place." "What do you expect, a miniature Taj Mahal rising between Mrs. Fowler's and Sergeant Burnaby's?" "Not quite, but I intend to keep a tight rein on him. He's already contemplating shutters and a sort of Chinese porch which would set us back 100 or two. I can see he'll want watching." Now, on this bright August morning, Peter did his best to impress upon Bellamy Croft the absolute necessity of keeping costs as low as possible. "This dry rot, what will it cost to put right?" Bellamy told him, and Peter flinched. "And a damp course?" "I should prefer to tell you after I have had a longer look at the place, but we ought to make a good job of it while we're about it. No point in cheese paring." "Naturally. The essentials must be done, and done well, but I simply haven't the money to indulge in extras such as this porch you show on the plan. Heaven knows what I'll get for my present home, a lot, I sincerely hope, but the bridging loan from the bank must be met eventually, and I'm determined to cut my coat according to the cloth. Maybe we can do all the fancy bits when the other two cottages come vacant." "Ah, yes, indeed. Stage 2, said Bellamy, shuffling enormous sheets of crackling paper upon his desk. I quite appreciate your position, and frankly, I'm glad to work for a man who knows his mind. Stage 1, the conversion of the middle two cottages, we can keep very simple, and by the time we've reached Stage 2, we shall know how much more you'll feel able to embark upon. His bland pink face was creased in smiles. He looks happy enough, thought Peter, but then he doesn't have to foot the bill. Was it a harebrained project he had started? What other snags besides dry rot, rising damp, two awkward tenants, a jungle of garden, and an architect with alarmingly lavish plans did the future hold? Was he going to bless or curse the day he decided to buy Tyler's Row? Time alone would tell. What with one thing and the other, it was well on into August by the time the contract was signed and the die cast. One sultry afternoon, Diana and Peter drove over to their new property with a formidable collection of gardening tools in the back of the car. "Do you really think you'll need that enormous great pickaxe?" "It's a mattock," corrected Peter, "and the answer's yes. It will probably be the most useful tool of the lot. You won't need that trowel and hand fork you're so helpfully putting in until next season." The gate scraped a deepening semicircle in the path as they pushed it in. "I must see to that," said Peter, shaking his head. They carried the tools into the backyard and surveyed the jungle with mingled awe and dismay. "Look at the height of those nettles," said Diana. "Take a look at the brambles, tentacles like octopuses, or do I mean octopi? And those prickles. We really need a flamethrower before we can begin with orthodox tools." He picked up a billhook and stepped bravely into the weeds, followed by Diana carrying a pair of shears. "We'll start at the bottom of the garden and work our way toward the house," Peter said. "Knock off the top stuff first and burn it as we go." It was hot work. Far away could be heard the rumblings of a storm, and dark clouds massed ominously on the horizon. Thousands of tiny black thunderflies settled everywhere, maddening them with their tickling and swarming into their hair, ears, and eyes. Their labors were punctuated by slapping noises as they smoked the unprotected parts of their bodies, which were under constant attack from the tormentors. They had been working for about an hour and cleared a strip about 2 yards wide across the width of the garden when they became conscious of Mrs. Fowler watching them sharply over the hedge. "Oh, good afternoon," called Diana, wiping her sticky face on the back of her glove. "As you see, we're just making a start on this terrible mess." "There's some good rhubarb just where you're standing," replied Mrs. Fowler austerely. "And there used to be a row of raspberry canes. Looks as though you've cut them down now." Diana refused to be daunted. "Well, there it is," she said lightly. "We shall have to start from scratch, it's obvious. It's impossible to tell weeds from plants now that it's got into this state." "Should have been seen 2 weeks ago," continued Mrs. Fowler. "All them weeds have seeded and blown over into my garden. Never had so much groundsel and couch grass in my life." Peter straightened his back and came to his wife's support. "And, ground elder," went on Mrs. Fowler before he could say anything, "and them dratted buttercups, bindweed, chickweed, docks, the lot, all come over from this patch." "Any poison ivy?" Peter asked mildly. "Or scold's tongue?" Mrs. Fowler looked suspicious. "Don't know those, but if there's any over there, it'll be in here by now." "I'm glad to see you anyway," said Peter. "I was going to knock to tell you we're going to make a bonfire of this lot, in case you had washing hanging out or wanted to close the windows." Mrs. Fowler drew in her breath in a menacing manner, but said nothing. She nodded and retired to her house. A few sharp bangs told the toilers that windows were being slammed shut. "What an old bitch she is," remarked Peter conversationally, slashing at a clump of nettles. "Peter, don't," begged Diana. "She'll hear you." "Do her good," he said, unrepentant. "Pass the rake, and we'll get that bonfire going before it rains." At that moment they heard a loud cough. Sergeant Burnaby's sallow face loomed above the other hedge like a harvest moon. "Good afternoon, sir. Just made a pot of tea, and hope you and the lady will do me the honor of taking a cup." "How kind," said Diana. "I'd love one." Peter looked less pleased. He was a man who liked to finish the job in hand. "I want to get the bonfire started before the storm breaks." "Let me take the green stuff over the hedge for my fowls," urged Sergeant Burnaby eagerly. "They dearly love a bit to pick at, and it'll help you get rid of it." "Fine," said Peter, brightening. He gathered an armful of grass, docks, hogweed, and sow thistle, and staggered with it to the hedge. There was a fluttered squawking as Sergeant Burnaby flung it over the wire, and then a contented clucking as the hens scattered the largesse with busy legs. "May as well let them have the lot," observed their master after the fourth load had been deposited. Peter obediently scraped together the last few wisps, and as he did so, a crack of thunder immediately above them made them jump. A spatter of raindrops fell upon them. "Come straight in, ma'am," called Sergeant Burnaby, retreating up the path. "Run for it," shouted Peter, snatching the tools together, and within 2 minutes they were in the old soldier's kitchen, shaking the rain from their clothes. Everything looked remarkably clean and tidy, thought Diana, when one considered that the lone occupant was approaching 80. There was a kitchen range identical with their own in the next cottage against one wall, but this one was glossy with blacklead, and on the mantel shelf above were several brass ornaments, including a large round clock, all shining. Among them Diana saw a little embossed box, and following her gaze, the old man took it down for her to handle. It was quite heavy, and bore a medallion showing the heads of George V and Queen Mary. "Sent to us in the Great War," said the sergeant with pride. "We was in the trenches at the time. Christmas present it was, filled with tobacco. We all thought a lot of that, I can tell you. My old pal Jim Bennett, he treasured his, too. It gets a rub-up every Saturday." "I should think that all your lovely things get a rub-up weekly," said Diana, handing back the box. "Does anyone come to help you?" "Not a soul," said Sergeant Burnaby proudly. "I don't want no help. That Mrs. Fowler come once early on, but it was only to snoop around. I sent her packing." He stirred his cup with a large teaspoon and looked fierce. "I'm not one to speak ill," he continued. Diana waited for him to do just that, and was not disappointed. "But that old besom needs watching, sir. Tongue like a whiplash, and not above nicking anything that's going. Why, the moment the Coggses and Waiteses left, she was in there in the gardens digging up what she fancied. They come back a week after they'd moved to dig up a row of potatoes, but they was gone. Next door, I told them. You have a look at the shed next door. You'll find 'em all right, sacked up for the winter." He sniffed at the remembrance. "Them Waiteses never done nothing about it. Too easy going by half, always was. But good neighbors to me. I miss 'em." Diana exchanged a glance with her husband. Peter's face bore the impatient look of a schoolmaster suffering tale-telling and about to take retaliatory action. "Your flowers are so pretty," said Diana hastily, rising to look out of the window. The rain drummed down relentlessly, spinning silver coins on the flagstones and the seat of the wooden armchair outside the back door. The bright patch of marigolds, cornflowers, and Shirley poppies was a blur through the streaming window, but Diana's comment had succeeded in stemming the old man's venom and in soothing her husband's irritation. "I like a bit of color," said Sergeant Burnaby. "I dig over a bit near the house and fling in packets of seeds. Annuals, you know, all higgledy-piggledy. Don't take a minute, and there's a fine bright sight for the summer." He turned to Peter. "You planning to do anything about the thatch?" he asked. Peter looked cautious. "Not at the moment," he replied. "The architect is still studying things." He did not care to tell the sergeant that the thatch would probably be renewed or at least repaired in stage 2 after the demise of his host. "The window frames are rotten," continued the sergeant, "and my chimney don't look too healthy." "They'll be seen to," said Peter frankly. These things were included in stage 1, he seemed to remember. "Can't do it all at once, you know, but we'll put things ship-shape as soon as we can." You see, said Sergeant Burnaby, filling Peter's cup again before he could refuse, my end of this row gets all the weather. You'll find that's true, sir. Now, old Mrs. Vinegar Bottle up the other end, she'll worry the guts out of you, pardon me, ma'am, about what she wants doing, but her place is a king to this, sheltered, you see, from the Westerlies. And her old man kept things up together, I'm told, when he was alive. He spooned sugar briskly from a glass bowl into his cup. 1, 2, 3, 4, he counted under his breath. Diana suppressed a shudder. It must taste like thin golden syrup. Poor devil, commented the sergeant. He's better off wherever he is. That old cat must have helped him to the grave, I don't doubt. Peter drained his cup and stood up. Time we were off. Very kind of you to give us tea. Very kind, echoed Diana. The old man looked suddenly old and pathetic. Must you go? Don't see much company, you know. No need to hurry away on my account. I've got some old photos of this place you might like to see. He began to open the table drawer in a flustered way. Diana's heart smote her. We'd love to some other time. We really must go now and pack up our tools. But it's still raining, protested the old man, trying in vain to keep his guests. Can't be helped, said Peter firmly. We'll have another go at the garden as soon as we can. And there's plenty of marking waiting for me at home, too, which I must go and tackle. He held out his hand and smiled at Sergeant Burnaby. I know you'll forgive us for hurrying away, he said with sudden gentleness, but you'll be seeing quite a lot of us in the next few weeks. Too much, probably. They escaped into the pouring rain, collected their things, and drove home through the storm to Caxley. The Hales spent the gray, wet evening in their armchairs. Diana's hands were busy with knitting a pale blue coat for a goddaughter's baby. Her head was busy with thoughts of their 2 tenants. What on earth had they taken on? Peter's thoughts were engaged with his history marking. His red pencil ticked and slashed its way across the pages. Every now and again he gave a snort of impatience. Sometimes I wonder if lower fourths can take in American history, he said, slapping shut one grubby exercise book. Young fellows here informs me that the northern abortionists, a phrase used 5 times, were extremely active in the 19th century. Northern abortionists, echoed Diana, bewildered. Abolitionists, to everyone else in the form, explained Peter, reaching for his pipe, but not to young fellows, evidently. He's the sort of boy who writes the first word that comes into his head. Might just as well have been the northern aborigines or Abyssinians or anything else beginning with ab. He patted the books into a neat pile. That'll do for tonight, he said firmly. They don't have to be returned until term starts. Only another fortnight, said Diana, and so little done at Tyler's Row. What's the hurry? Look upon it as a hobby. It's no good fretting about delay, and we're in the hands of Bellamy and the builder anyway. But nothing seems to be happening. It will soon enough, Peter assured her. He spoke more truly than he knew. Chapter 6. The Problem of Tyler's Row. Work began at Tyler's Row toward the end of September, and Diana and Peter grew quite excited when they saw how much had been accomplished after 10 days. Everything movable, the old kitchen range, the light fittings, the worm-eaten dresser, even some of the wallpaper, had gone, and the 2 cottages appeared to be stripped for action. What they failed to realize in their innocence was the fact that the first stages of any building work are rapid and quickly apparent. It is the last stages which are so maddeningly prolonged, when plasterers wait for plumbers, and plumbers wait for electricians, and decorators wait for the right paint, and the wallpaper, and the owners wait to get into the place with the growing conviction that the madhouse will claim them first. Those despairing days were still in the future, but already things were becoming complicated for the Hales in the early part of the term. The headmaster, knowing that Peter was intending to move, asked if he might buy his present house. My son John comes back from Singapore before Christmas. They've 3 children now, and another on the way, and your house would be ideal. We shan't be out of it until well after Christmas, said Peter. Surely a couple of cottages won't take all that time to put to rights. "They're doing pretty well at the moment," replied Peter, "but Bellamy Croft won't be hurried, and I think John will have to look elsewhere if he wants to bring the family straight into a house." "He might get temporary accommodation," mused the headmaster aloud. "Until you're ready, I mean." A very pleasant situation that would be, thought Peter, with a harassed family man breathing down his neck, urging him into a half-finished Tyler's Row. He was not going to be hustled into anything, he told himself sturdily. But this was only the beginning. It was amazing how many people decided that Peter Hale's house was exactly what they or their relations had been waiting for, and he found himself accosted in Caxley High Street on several occasions by would-be buyers. He had two stock answers. The house was not on the market yet and wouldn't be until Tyler's Row was ready. Masters and Jones would be the people to approach. He was not handling it himself. It was all a trifle wearing, although it was some comfort to know that it looked as though the house would sell easily. And then there was the architect. Peter had said that Bellamy Croft would not be hurried. He was beginning to wonder if he went to Tyler's Row at all. There were several things he wanted to talk to him about, but he never seemed to be in the office, and his secretary was a past master in covering up for him. Always, it appeared, Bellamy was at work in some remote village, or had gone to consult someone at Oxford, or London, or Cheltenham. "I'll ask him to ring you," was the nearest Peter ever got to seeing the elusive fellow, but he waited in vain for the telephone to ring. And when, after several frustrating weeks, it did, Bellamy's apologies were so profuse and disarming that Peter's ire evaporated. However, it was soon revived by the discovery that Bellamy had returned to his fight for a mock Gothic porch in the center of Tyler's Row. "I'm not having it," he told Diana firmly. "I'm not being saddled with a Chinese Chippendale porch with a pointed lead roof costing 200 smackers when I want a simple affair with thatch on top." "You did ask him to do the job," pointed out Diana. "If I ask a butcher for 2 pork chops," replied Peter heatedly, "I'm damned if I'll accept a saddle of mutton just because he wanted me to have it. My God, what a battle it all is." As term progressed, the outlook grew steadily gloomier. Peter began to get headaches, a most unusual thing for a man in his health. "Nothing exercise won't cure," he insisted, setting out on a 4-mile walk whenever he was so afflicted. "Perhaps you need new reading glasses," suggested Diana solicitously. "No, no, these are perfectly adequate. A spell in the fresh air and plenty of muscle work's the answer." And he would vanish for an hour or so, and return rather more exhausted than when he went out, certainly in no mood to tackle the piles of marking which always stand about at a schoolmaster's sitting room. It was at this stage that Diana found their roles reversed. She, who had been so full of doubts about the move, now did the comforting. "It'll sort itself out. There are bound to be setbacks. All progress goes in fits and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 back. And if you think of Tyler's Row a couple of months ago and then today, it's really quite heartening." Peter refused to be consoled. "The time they take," he stormed, raising fists to heaven. "You'd think 3 men plus an architect would get the place done in a month. When I think that this is only stage 1 of Bellamy's plan, I wonder if I'll ever live to see stage 2, or even if I want stage 2, or will be able to raise the money for it. As far as I can see, we'll be looking for a nice little Eventide home for the aged by the time stage 1's done." And there, I'm afraid, we must leave the exasperated Mr. Hale until next time.